Okay, amazing. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Make It Make Sense series, Career Development for IMG. And today we're going to be talking about the non-clinical alternative careers in the UK for IMGs. As you people know on this show, all we want to do is give you, the knowledge, the expertise, the insights, the prospects, the problems, the challenges, and how you would navigate those. And I think probably now with the new Labour government, there's no better time to understand, your future as an IMG in Great Britain. And so today I have no other person that's better than the person that we have. He's been um, in the career space for a very long time. Expertise is very far and wide reaching from, Wales to England, from clinical work to informatics to AI. There's no other person than the very best in the business. I have today with me Dr. Kelechi Ronald Ikpe, and then briefly known as Dr. Ron. He runs the podcast Behind the Scenes with Dr. Ron. And so in a few minutes, I'll give him some chance to introduce himself. But today he's going to be with me to tackle non-clinical and alternative careers in the UK for IMGs. Now, this is quite popular globally for many reasons, and you're going to learn a lot about this. And Dr. Roland would be giving us significant insight on how to get it done from someone that's actually done it before. Now, there's a difference to listen to someone that is speculating and giving you theories. Now, to listen to someone that's been there, done that, and is here. All right, guys. So let's get. So I mean, you guys know me already. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm going to be your kind and humble host. So in terms of the outline, we're going to introduce Dr. Roland in a minute, and we're going to tell you why you should consider non-clinical careers. What are some of the options out there? Key skills and transition strategy. Dr. Ron is going to give us his journey, and we're going to look at challenges and success, of course, resources and mentorship. So let's introduce Dr. Ron now. So before I give Dr. Ron the mic, just to let you know, Dr. Ron is a health informatics specialist. He's a digital dictation system consultant. He's a business analyst in digital health. He's the host of Behind the Scene podcast in health with Dr. Ron. I've been on there once. He's kind enough to have me. Do go and watch it. And I believe Dr. Ron is on Spotify. Go and listen to Dr. Ron on Spotify. Very useful knowledge, and that's his LinkedIn profile. I think I've been talking too much. I'll pass the mic to Dr. Ron to carry on from here.
Thank you so much, Doc. It's good to be on the show with you. I mean, thanks for mentioning you came on my own podcast the other time. So here I am on your own. I think you said a lot, really. I don't even have much to say. Basically, I'm a medical doctor. I've pivoted into health technology and I work around implementation space, EPRs, digital dictation systems. Then I also sort of mentor people who are willing or considering, pivoting out of clinical space into the non-clinical space, giving you all the available options and how to sort of navigate that process. So I guess we'll probably unpack more as we get into the conversation.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for that. And I think there's a small number of people that would be thinking, can I do this part-time? What would you have to say for those people?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do this part-time, you can do this full-time, because when I started, I was, sort of managing this with full-time clinical work, part-time this side. Then at some point I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to make a full transition before I just sort of moved over fully. So yes, you can do it part-time.
You guys, there you have it. You can do it part-time and then decide to go full-fledged in due course. So why should you consider this? So a bit of interesting conversation here. And one of that is burnout. And people now talk about work-life balance.
Yep.
And I would tell a little bit of story. There's a very nice video on LinkedIn by an Indian coach. And he looked at 3 generations. And so that's your grandparents, your parents, and then you. Your grandparents went to work for survival, meaning if they had a discriminatory boss, a harassing boss, they took it. Why? Because they needed to survive.
Yeah.
Your parents went to work for standard of living. What you say, standard of living, meaning they wanted you to have education, they wanted you to have a home over your head, they wanted you to have food in your plate. However, in the current world that we are, people go to work to fulfill their dreams, what they have envisioned their life should be. And that's why the work-life balance conversation have become very big now. And even if you take I think myself and Roland, who've been in this medical work at least longer than 10 years. At least when I was a medical student, you just be doing call.
Steady calls.
Or cardiothoracic, and it was like that all over the world. Nobody, all the European directive hours that you have in the NHS now, they didn't exist. You know, they thought the most dedicated doctor, regardless of specialty, was the one that came by 6 a.m. and left the following day 6 a.m., took a bath for 45 minutes, a small meal, and came back and did it again and again and again. The era of those days is gone. So the first thing is burnout, work-life balance, you know. And the reason why this conversation has become bigger is medical errors is linked with burnout. Yeah. And the system has changed. So there's a bit of interesting research that's come from Medscape, and it shows, you know, just the amount of reasons, some of the things that contribute to doctors' burnout, you know, and this is specific to the UK, but this you can apply pretty about anywhere in the world. And you can find the bureaucracies, you know, insufficient pay reward comes very high. So now so that's one of the reasons why it's a sensible thing to consider alternative careers, either on a part-time or on a full-time basis. And if you are an IMG, you know, realistically, if you come in for the cream of the crop, which is a training number, it's going to take a while to get the training number that you need, regardless of the country. So some countries, IMGs are almost blocked out. Some countries, there's not a political system that blocks them out. That you may have a pressure group, for instance, that's trying to block them out, as you have in the UK now. The BMA, you know, Resident Doctors Committee is trying to do a policy that would block people out. And I think it's ridiculous, for instance, because the data doesn't show that IMGs is a threat. And it's a problem if they do that, because what you're going to have is a situation whereby, you know, the competitiveness to get a training number in the UK is watered down, you know, for people that have rights to be in the country, you know, either as citizens or things like that. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But again, limited access to training. And you need to also understand that you can. So when I was starting to do some public health work, the professor that said to me, listen, if you become a surgeon, you can impact, you can do, if you do an operation, you would save one life, regardless of what you do, whether you operate the brain or operate the, I mean, he clearly didn't like surgeons too much. I wanted to do both and the global surgery or global health as it applies to surgery. However, his argument was, look, if you do public health, the impact that you would have on society as a whole would be greater. And you would agree with him that he does have a point in that sense. So if you are someone that's looking for a broader impact in society, you must also look to be in careers where the numbers is bigger. if you go like Roland and you solve, for instance, the electronic medical record problem for a whole trust or a whole country. Let's say we went to Nigeria and we do a whole state. That's us impacting what, 2 million people, 4
People.
million
Yeah.
people. It's unlikely that even if you start a career as a surgeon as early, you probably wouldn't be able to do that. So I'll give Dr. Ron some opportunity to just give his own take on, some of these broader issues that could influence people taking this career path.
So I mean, lots of interesting points there. So looking at my own sort of experience, really, I think key for me was the thing around like work-life balance, like you mentioned, because some of these non-clinical roles, they actually sort of give you like a predictable schedule that you can work with. So you don't need to worry what's my rota going to be like in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Your life basically sort of depends on how your rota is structured or sent out and all of that. So that's very key for me. Then some of these areas also sort of give you a less stressful work environment. So, I mean, to be fair, patient care is very high pressure. Direct patient care is very high pressure. You look at roles like, let's say, people who are in the ER, emergency medicine, people are coming in, you're seeing babies, you're seeing elderly people, pregnant people. It's very high pressure, right? But non-clinical roles, some of them actually give you low pressure, stress while you're still making maximum impact, really. I'm not saying they're not stressful, but when you compare with direct patient care, then it becomes very, very significant. Then you also have the opportunity of utilizing your clinical skills in different ways and different environments, right? Because as clinicians, we have a whole lot of skill set. And I think we're going to talk about that when we look at transferable skills and all of that. So your clinical skills is very invaluable in the IT space, in the research space, in medical education space, even in the finance space, because I know people who have pivoted into finance areas. Then you also have opportunities for leadership where you sort of have the options of being able to shape what healthcare is going to look like or shape policies and all of that. So those are some of the key considerations for me, really. But I think top of the list is like work-life balance for me. So right now, uh, I live a very like structured, predictable life. I have my weekends to myself and quietly or confidently pursue other interests because of the way your work is. So as I'm able to probably post a podcast on weekends, I'm able to create content without too much pressure, stress. Yeah. So basically, yeah, that's some of the reasons to look at considering non-clinical careers. Then I know there are also people who are looking to sort of do this by the side. I've come across people who they don't want to transition fully, right? They still just want to be in that space, but also doing something by the side, which is very, 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 possible. Because looking at some of the implementations I've worked with, you have clinicians who are digitally savvy, so they've sort of cut out their time on the direct patient care side of things and putting more time on this side of things. So anything is possible, really. But yeah, these reasons are very, very valid.
Impressive, Dr. Ron. So there's a lot of reasons, like you can see. Of course, it comes with a type of flexibility that you'd find very useful in the everyday, market, and that's daytime flexibility. So
Yep.
when you have time in the daytime, it's useful because what it does for you is you are able to pursue interest when most people are around doing business. The banks are open, the schools are open, the markets are open, and things like that. One of the interesting bits is the entrepreneurship opportunities. And for instance, if you have more time in your hands, depending on if you do this type of roles, you are able to have things like stock options, and which you wouldn't get if you work, for instance, for a public company like the NHS. It's not just sensible for the NHS to keep selling parts of itself to staff. But however, of course, in private sector, you certainly can have stock options as bonuses and things like that. And you can see how to, pursue entrepreneurial interest. And these stock options have sometimes changed people's life, because you see companies that started, for instance, ChatGPT, not typically, of course, they didn't start as a for-profit company. But think about if when ChatGPT started, you had, just a certain number of shares that was worth £1,000. Think about what those shares will be. Your shares will be over maybe 100,000 now, or 200, and it's only going to get higher. And then you have marketability skills. One of the things that nobody would be able to teach you in medical school, because it's not necessary, is marketing. Yeah, because we are not short of patients as far as the public service is concerned in a developed country. Once you create access, the market is sorted out. The patients will come to you. So one of the things you wouldn't learn, because it's not just needed, is nobody's going to teach you how to sell anything. Yeah, again, because marketing can move you into the era of doing certain things that may not be considered ethical, or are actually not moral or ethical in context of medical practice. It will also give you opportunity to increase your management skills. People skills is key. In a clinical environment, you need some people skills, but most of the times you have a defined thing that you need to do, and there's a defined way that's been done for a long time. Yeah, and there's a defined way that you do that, and so you can almost predict what you're doing once you've done it for a few years. Of course, type of education you get, what people call unconventional education, or what we call street smart. Because you're learning, for instance, how to negotiate with someone from real estate, with a lawyer, different backgrounds, and just communication styles. And of course, tech. As you know, about 20 to 30% or 40% of the biggest companies now are tech companies. So Meta, Google, Alphabet, you name them. Amazon is almost a tech company. They keep getting bigger and bigger. And so those are some of the, significant opportunities and significant reasons to consider that. So I think we've talked about these. These are just for the, issues where people look at some of the things driving doctors to consider this. So let's quickly look at some of the options. So you can get into this space, in a healthcare management and leadership. And here we'll talk about the things to consider when you do that. And then you can go into, so when you talk about healthcare management and leadership, some people will be asking, what do you mean? This is not the same thing as managing your team as a consultant. That's not the same thing. That's not necessarily the same thing with being a clinical director for the service. Let's say you're a clinical director for general surgery and vascular surgery, or surgery as a whole. It's a little bit different. There's some cross cover. This is more of management job. So for instance, you have the chief executives of like an NHS trust. Your role is purely healthcare management. You look at budgets, you understand budgetary codes, you understand business strategy, you understand how to balance the books. Yeah, and then you understand how to create team, manage them, and disintegrate them. You understand team, team processes like team forming, norming, transforming, and deforming. So it's basically management of teams and management of budget. So it's probably money, people, and conflicts. So it really, this is the type of things. And then in the UK, notoriously, the NHS has largely taken doctors out of management. So doctors don't do a lot of management of NHS hospitals, even nurses. And I think maybe it's 10-15% of CEOs in the UK that you find have medical background. So, but in America, the picture is a bit different. And we'll talk about the role of MBAs and project management and things like that. Then the other area is, of course, medical communication and publishing. So here you think of your journals, Springer, editors, writing. It's a huge market. And like Ronald has said, you in all of these spheres, your clinical expertise, of course, does come into play indirectly. Now, education and training, a lot of opportunities here, from teaching for universities to helping big pharmas and medtech companies with their medical education affairs. Yeah, that's a huge area that people can go to. Then you have research and innovation, medical research, winning grants, innovating, patenting things. And again, there's a huge area of qualifications that you need. Clinical trials, working with big pharmas. And then, of course, you have health tech and informatics, which Roland would say more and more. You can consult for farmers and businesses. So they can, for instance, get your input on different products. One of the ones that I have been telling people on the group, and I don't know why they've not been taking it seriously, is medical surveys. So medical surveys are quite popular, and they want to know clinicians' experience, for instance, with devices. So everything's from cannulas, IV cannulas, to IV giving sets, to complex things like angioplasty catheters, to dermal fillers, to all of the things. They want to understand what's happening with their competitors. What is it that their competitors have? Because there's a push and pull in the market. There are a decent number of big players. If you look at, for instance, if you look at the syringes market, BD and the rest, competing with this group. If you look at medical devices, for instance, what's it called now? Ventilators or monitors. You look at Stryker, Carl Stokes, Olympus. So there's a competition there, Smith and Nephew, So they are interested to know your opinion. You get me? Why? Because companies want to also be relevant, because being relevant means you continue to be in the market.
In business, yep.
It's in business. So you have the regulatory and legal defense role. This, if you have the expertise, one of the common areas is medical examiner, which is managed by the Royal College of Pathologists. And then, of course, entrepreneurship and wellness careers. So there's, again, a huge area for people wanting to know how much exercise they should be doing, how much, for instance, wellness practice, what they should eat, what time, sleep, fasting. And you have people that have no medical, even training, doing very well in these areas. And so I'll just let Dr. Ron, give his comments very soon. But just look at this concentric cycle. It tells you a couple of things. So in the most innermost, which is the smallest size, is clinical proficiency is crucial and required. Then as you begin to go out, clinical proficiency is directly advantageous. Then as you go outward, you see that it is indirectly advantageous. And as you go outward in a bigger world, it is unnecessarily but generally applicable. Then in the outermost, you see that clinical proficiency is influential, though minimally relevant. So that tells you as you have a more bigger space of operating, you get me, your clinical knowledge would help you, but it's not required because you're going into broader society where people are not necessarily sick, they just want to be better. So I'll pass the mic to Dr. Ron for his own take on all of these options.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I mean, you've mentioned a lot of these things. So, typically, most times I like to sort of group all of this into two very large umbrellas. You have the coding roles and the non-coding roles, right? So, because I know doctors who are programmers and all of that, so I just put them under those two large umbrellas. So, everything that doesn't involve programming will fall under the non-coding role. So that's where typically you have the healthcare management, the medical comms, education and training, research and innovation, regulatory defense, entrepreneurship, and all of that. They fall under the non-coding role. So a simple analogy I usually use to look at the various options open to people is, let's look at an EPR implementation project, right? So it sounds simple. Yes, we're getting in an EPR into the hospital or into a trust or whatever. But behind the scenes now, there are a whole lot of people who are involved in making that happen, right? So top of the list now, you probably have the program manager, right? Who like overall responsibility of, like you said, top management, people, strategy, processes, and all of that. So he's at the top, managing everything. You need a project manager because by the time you start breaking down the whole implementation, so typically for those who are conversant with EPR systems, you hear of things like theaters, you hear of outpatients, you hear of inpatients, you hear of EPMA, you hear of scheduling and all of that. So the way we look at this, these are different modules that need to be built, sorted, tested, and all of that. So different project managers are required to sort of drive all of those, manage those projects and report into the program manager. So now this is basically two roles I've mentioned, right? Now, you need a business analyst in that process. What's their work? At a high level, they're responsible for figuring out what are the processes involved. So, for example, if I came into surgery now or vascular surgery, I want to understand what are the processes you guys do. Why do you take 10 steps to create a letter? How do you send out your letter? How do you order your medications and all of that? So that's my work, to figure out all of those things, document them, map the processes, because that's going to inform how we're building the software for you. So that's a business analyst role already. Then on the back of all of this, somebody is responsible for clinical safety, right? Always asking the question, what you guys are doing, is it going to cause patient harm or not? So that's the clinical safety officer, which any clinician can comfortably do. But I think the caveat for clinical safety officers is usually you must have a practicing license, or you should have a license anyway. So you have the clinical safety officer who is there looking at safety of the entire program and all of that. Then by the time we say we finish building the application, we are rolling out or whatever, somebody has to train clinicians and the staff on how to use the system. That is where the trainers come in. So there are a lot of digital health trainers out there, basically teaching people how to use systems and all of that. So again, that's another role you want to look at. Then in terms of the governance processes now, I mean, you can't do anything without looking at the whole GDPR, DPA, data sharing agreement, and all of that. That's where the information governance people come in. Again, medics can get into that space because we're making sure what we are doing is in line with the government regulatory framework and all of that. And while you're also doing the whole stuff, you still need data analysts who sort of have to look at the data we are collecting, analyzing them, because again, when you look at the outcomes we expect, we want to make more data driven decisions, really. So somebody has to look at the data and say, okay, this is what we have, and this is how we are going to use this data to, improve things. Then you talk about benefits management or benefit realization. Every project we're doing, we have some expected benefits that we're trying to, get out of that. So somebody has to sit down to say, what do we have now, and what's the process for getting the benefits, or how do we track the benefits we are getting to this, because the people who are paying for the solution also want to see value for money that they are paying for. So somebody has to look at the benefits and all of that. Then look at change management. So moving a hospital from paper-based records into digital is a huge change piece, right? Imagine somebody who has been using paper and pen for the past 25 years, and suddenly you're waking up to say all of you are moving to electronic systems. So that's a big change process. So, and that has to be managed very carefully, or else your project is going to sort of fail. So, change managers basically lead, they plan, they execute change initiatives, and that's something people can also sort of look into. Then you talk of adoption people or adoption specialists. So when we implement, somebody has to be responsible for driving that adoption of the system within the organization, because they are trying to make sure that healthcare professionals like you and I embrace and utilize the system the way we intend them to use them. So that's, that role for you. Then again, you mentioned somewhere around, writing communication. So we usually have people who are, comms and engagement, communication and engagement people, who are supposed to be doing all the briefs, sending all the newsletters and all of that for people to, know what's happening at every point in time. So that's communication. That's a form of medical, writing or communication and engagement people. So you actually need that. And I know a couple of people, healthcare professionals who are in that space really. So this is just one, project, and there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes just to drive this. So is I usually tell clinicians to look at it from the context. Like in the NHS, there are so many projects that are running every time. Is it an upgrade? Is it a new system or whatever? So if you look at what's happening, there's a lot of individuals behind, trying to drive that. So you try to figure out, okay, how are these guys doing this? What is actually involved, and how can I become a part of it? And you see, most trusts usually ask for, you know, people who are interested to volunteer to support all of those projects and all of that, super users and everything. So that's like a good opportunity to get a first-hand experience really of what actually happens, because I've seen people who transition from being volunteers to moving into that space full time by just understanding what's happening. So there's a lot to unpack, like you said. Farmer consulting, that's an area people can leverage their skills, on. There's a lot of people who are running businesses by the side, people are doing wellness careers by the side, and making good money by the side, really. So the options are just what do you call it, too numerous to mention. But again, we'll still talk about this later. It depends on your skill set, because every area sort of have like specific skill sets that you probably want to have or gain before you can sort of function very effectively in those spaces. So, for example, somebody who is very good at maybe coordinating people, making sure things are done in the right way, the right time, and all of that might be well suited for, project management roles, because you're coordinating, making sure and delivery, because that's what the project manager sort of does. Then people who are good at understanding processes, asking the hard questions. Why are we doing this? You might be leaning towards, business analysis side of things around user experience, user research, and all of that, because you're digging to find out why people do things the way, they do. So I'll probably pause for now then. Yeah.
Amazing, Dr. Ron. You've heard it from someone that's actually done it. You've heard it from someone that's actually drank the water that came from the oasis, and actually someone that has walked through the tunnel and come out through the other side where there is light. So, yes. So we've talked about all of this, isn't it? So we've talked about some of the healthcare and management opportunities you can plug into is hospital or clinic admin. You can manage a hospital, and that used to be like our responsibility with the nurses to do anyway. Back in the day, the ward belonged to the you and the head nurse. You guys decided the budget. You guys decided everything. So think about that. Think about supplies. Think about logistics. Think about the food that the patients eat. Think about who supplies it, for how the skills. Think about the staffing. Think about the time each staff spend on what. So that's one of the things to think about. And then you have the NHS management trainee programs. They do exist. You can plug into those. Think about health insurance rules, claims, risks, and management. Think about some medical actuarial science, forensic medicine, and then telemedicine administration, which Dr. Ron has touched on. So there's a lot of skill around leadership. Dr. Ron has dealt with it. Communication, change management, professionalism. It's very useful to be high on professionalism. And then think about, can you use evidence? Think about resources and knowledge. How much of knowledge have you kept gathering in the area? If you understand that with each area, there's this minimum amount of knowledge. Is it escape velocity knowledge that you need?
Yeah.
Because don't make the mistake to have like a generalistic knowledge in each area, sales, whatever. There's a minimum escape velocity, that knowledge that you need. I'm trying to look for the word, but that critical mass of knowledge, that's the word. So you need a critical mass of knowledge and understanding in that area. For instance, to host a podcast to start with, do the research, invite people, get them to be interested. So it's not going to happen overnight. Avoid
Absolutely.
trying to be reactive because you're unhappy about something. You need generally a decent plan. And my recommendation is somewhere between 6 months to 18 months to realistically start transitioning and gaining skills, So what's about the publishing space? Medical writing. Again, you need to realistically start into a space from a blog. However, I think one of the things you must open yourself into is you must open yourself into significant feedback to your writing. And you must be willing to get feedback from people that would say, don't take positive feedback too much, because you must look at the things that you improve from what you are not good at. I think that's one of the things people don't like.
From the gaps.
You must be able to, you must be able to allow people give you feedback as they see it. Some of the negative feedback, of course, may be too harsh, but as long as something is not, insulting or derogatory. If someone says, I think your writing is rubbish, then ask, could you, point out why, you think
it's rubbish. Yeah.
Then they give you section by section feedback. I think the title doesn't marry Now, oftentimes in my experience, the first acute phase of the feedback tends to be overwhelming. So leave it, give it some 2 days. I'm just sharing my experience. When someone gives, sometimes give it some time. Don't work on it, relax. When you go back, you're rested after a week, go back and look at the writing, do a bit more research. Then, of course, patient education. Write stuff, for instance, that address things for patients in a blog where patients actually read now, or the general public read. This is not very easy to do, but you must keep exposing whatever you write, your content, more and more to where it will be read, and then also where people can interact with you. There's a lot of competition with writing now because you have vlogs and you have video podcasts and things like that. Health journalism, yes, get some training. Why not? Go get some training from journalists, how to present, how to, if you have the opportunity and time, do a journalism, internship from, the BBC, learn production and all of that. And it's good when you pick these skills early, because then you continue to develop it. Like I said to people, the brain is just a tool. What you use it for depends on you. Medical publishing, of course, this is very suited to, for instance, people that are already well established clinically. You can write a book, medical book, textbook, editors, especially in areas, for instance, that has not been explored. And I can give you a lot. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, this is highly unexplored in all of the areas. For instance, there's no Nigerian written textbook of general practice or family medicine. And we know very well, if you take an American textbook of family medicine, of course, there will be knowledge that you can certainly use. But you don't have the Nigerian context. Why? Because you need a clinician that's actually worked in the area. He or she can be from anywhere, that would marry, the things, that the way it is. Like if you look at general practice of family medicine in Nigeria, it's highly hospital-based, So if you look at that in the developed countries, they're highly more community-based. And that's a completely virgin land, and not just general practice. Fine, they've tried to do something in surgery, but a lot of that space is still unexplored, So if you begin to write books in that areas, and you begin to pitch it to publishers, you already have a market, and you have publishers within Nigeria, you have international publishers that can, and people globally will read your book. Because if I'm going to practice in Jamaica, I want to practice surgery or vascular surgery, I want to have an idea, what's the spectrum of diseases that patients will be coming to the clinic with, what's the facility within the country. So I'd like to quickly have a book I can read or reference. So it's a big area. There's a huge amount of opportunity in various specialties, for instance. And even if you talk about this non-medical career, there's actually no book in Nigeria, as far as I'm aware, that deals with this topic of today, And what happens is when you write a book, you get opportunity. You may not make a lot directly from the book, but you get an opportunity to be invited as an expert. So that's conferences upon conferences that can last your entire 40 years career. You build courses, you begin to have fans and people that want to work with you for a long time. You get university professorship. Why? Because you are about the first one to do it. So I have my idea for a book, actually, because that I have seen. Of course, I won't tell anybody. And because I don't think anyone has written anything in that area of surgery in our environment. And I was strongly considering that. Then you can also think about content development for tech and pharma. what
That's a
it
big
is
space.
around. Yes, a huge space. So is there room to gain more skills? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. I don't know if Dr. Ron has something to add before we
So,
move to the next
so
subset.
in terms of gaining skills, right? I mean, there are so many opportunities for people to sort of pick up all of these skills. And I think when you were talking earlier, you mentioned internships. So internships are a very, very good way to pick some of these skills. And some of them you can actually do them around your schedule as a clinician. Really, I know a lot of these companies sometimes are very flexible, and you could say I can only do probably 10 hours, or I can give only 5 hours per week, and all of that. It's really flexible. But what you stand to gain, you sort of shorten the time it takes for you to pick that skill. Let's say, for example, you're interested in project management, right? You begin to join, morning calls or their sprint sessions. You start sort of seeing how these sprints happen, how the head of the team manages those sessions, how actions are, tracked, how they are being delegated, and all of that. So you can't read that in a textbook, really. So even you can read a million times, but it doesn't make sense until you actually see it in practice. Or you're thinking of, let's say, content development, for example. Now, there's a structured approach to how you sort of build content. Let's say you're hosting a podcast, you have to find the guests, you have to send them invite, like you said, get them interested. You have to think about the topic, you have to schedule, so there's a process, a whole process that behind that, which you can read in the books, but until you actually see happen, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And finally, YouTube is a very good treasure trove of information. Really, I think that's where a lot of my learning actually happened, because I'm like mostly self-taught, really. And so a lot of people underestimate the power or value of YouTube. So there's nothing you're looking for that there's no video out there of somebody saying, okay, I've done this before and this is the process. So that sort of also shortens your, knowledge acquisition, timeline. So if you're going to do it in 18 months, you could actually do it in 6 months if you're able to sort of, do internships and, follow resources that have been proven to sort of work for people. So yes, it's good, but getting those skills is very, very important.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So, like Ron has said, it's one thing. I think there's a saying that a doctor that learns medicine without books is like a sailor going to sea without the compass. Yeah,
Yeah.
a one that learns it without practice is like someone sailing on uncharted water.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the reality is one will give you the most. So, and in my experience, sometimes when people speak to me and I said, look, I think you should come to the academy and spend some of your time and gain some skills under me. They give me a million reasons why they are busy. And it's funny to me, you get just because I think I pay a decent amount of tax. Like if I look at just the tax I pay in the NHS, but I keep saying yes to opportunities. One of the mistakes people make when you're still fairly early in your career, you must learn to say yes most of the time. Sometimes the boss just wants to see, does this guy say yes? Because you need to get to a certain stage in your career for you to dictate stuff. So if the trust asks me to do something, as a rule, I'll say yes 7 times before I say one no. And if you're just starting out, you probably need to say yes 10 times. And look at it, all of my mentees, the other one. So if I have an Indian mentee, they will say yes 11 times when you ask them. There's a reason for that. Because before you get someone that's going to advocate for you before board where everybody's angry, he needs to understand he needs to be clear that you are committed.
Yeah.
Because in terms of outcome, I'm not looking for someone to give me a bunch of reasons why they can't do something, except maybe there's a clear-cut healthcare. If you are telling me you cannot be stretched, then what do you want us to do? If you are telling Dr. Ron that, you cannot research 5 topics and he doesn't accept one for the podcast, you're saying you can't be stretched, and so there's something, those listening here, when you are still early in your career, just use this principle. It's very important. Avoid being quick to say no.
Yep.
I'm not saying, of course, if someone asks you to do something that breaks the law or something, not those group, but you need to come across as someone that is hungry. You need to come across as someone, and the boss will say, you know what, I've been offered roles without being in fact, when I interviewed for Kent one time, Kent, University of Kent, there's a Professor Anna Romito. She's the dean. She was impressed with my work ethic, and they offered me another role without interview. Many months. She's like, look, I'm impressed with how you work, your professionalism, as I can guarantee you once we, and the HR sent it to me just because I didn't want to go to Kent at the time. Why? So learn because for someone senior, they have many options. Yeah, so in the beginning of your career, you need to understand you're trying to prove yourself. When you get to a certain level and people know what to expect, they're like, okay, fine, if we get Ron on here, if we organize this amount of money for Ron to go and interview people in France about healthcare, we know what to expect.
Yeah.
You have some credibility and things. So just something for those listening, to have at the back of their minds. So this we've talked about. I'm not going to spend too much time. Again, one of the things I told the ones, especially on the group, is if you come and you volunteer, you do some short fellowship with us, about 4 weeks. These are things that me and the team can teach you, make you understand curriculum, the various, give you a few presentations to do, like a case-based presentation, so that you can develop your presentation skills. You can develop your ability to present complex, subjects, research them, and then develop your stage presence, so to speak. Simulation training is another big area where you don't necessarily need to interact with patients. So you are in the education center, you do a 9 to 5, or sometimes you do a flexible role. If there's really nothing, you are sitting in your office or you can work from home. Again, developing your skill as an examiner. If you come, we can train you, get you contacts of universities that can give you the training to become an OSCE examiner. Then you begin to develop your skill. Yeah, because medical schools are interested in someone that is already examining. Now, they are not very open to find this one doesn't know his way around, except you are one big professor or big GP or, and then at that level, you already have the skill one way or the other. Then also, if you come to, you begin to learn, how do I develop a CPD? Yeah, so when you come, the podcast can be converted to CPD points. You learn the processes like Ron has said. How do we apply to CIPD so that this can be a CPD point and it can be used for training? I've just put the, medical education career 3 here. At any of these points, you can pivot, either full-time or part-time or anything. And this has been the case for like a very long time. So I don't know if Dr. Ron will give some more context in this part.
So, I think one of the things that stood out while you were talking is around the whole presentation skills, managing sort of stage presence and all of that, which is a very key skill again, in these other areas for people who want to sort of pivot or look at other opportunities. Because one thing I realized is you're still going to be doing a lot of presentations, you're still going to be talking to lots of people. You probably be having the opportunity to be interacting with senior management, like the SROs, like the CIOs, like even the CEOs of the hospitals, basically. So being able to know how do they want this information delivered, because everybody sort of differs. Some people are happy when they are seeing like graphs in their presentations, they want to see the trends and all of that. Some people are happy with details and all of that. So being able to understand people, understand the various ways that your audience, basically, okay, you're supposed to come here, who is my audience first of all? And because you need to tailor your presentation to the kind of people you're speaking with. So if I was making a presentation to, let's say, the admin team, it's going to be different from when I'm talking to the developers or the interface team. It's going to be different from when I'm talking to the finance people, because they have different requirements and different expectations. So that's very, very key, presentation and communication skills, really. So I just thought I should highlight that.
Amazing, amazing. So we'll go to the next. So research and innovation is a big area. So sometimes if you're pivoting to research, one of the things you want to consider, is there a role for me to take a more research fellowship? And so here you need to do the GCP, good clinical practice. There's a training that you need in research. University medical-based research, NHS academic clinical fellowship, research roles in pharma. So there's clinical trial research roles that you can take either part-time or full-time basis. But just some caveats here, you're likely going to require a master's degree, decent amount of short courses about lab techniques, going to see what's happening in these areas, putting yourself, like I said, the critical mass of skills and knowledge that you need, and it won't happen overnight. So people are lucky we're doing this, giving this knowledge and content for entirely free, guiding you through, the path. But like Ron will tell you, it cost us a lot to get to know this knowledge. I traveled and funded myself to go to America and Canada because I wanted to see and feel and spark myself, and until you look for ways, there's this, again, let me just say this, there's this culture that if I don't get a scholarship, I wouldn't move. I think that's a very terrible idea. I'm saying this as someone that's gotten 2 scholarships. You must make a plan when you have scholarship. And if you don't have, start with the smallest thing you can fund and build up that way, because scholarships would only be given to just how many people to start with. So if there are 100 people looking for scholarship, the data shows that it's only 3 to 5 that will get it. That 100 people with at least the same basic qualification. So while it's good to look for scholarship because there's training as you're applying, isn't it? So when you apply, it trains you to put in an application and try and make the argument that you're the candidate. And then maybe you go to the second stage and it also improves you. And then you go to the third stage and, things like that. But always also have a plan outside, if this doesn't work. Dr. Ron?
Yep. So again, in research, right? So it's an interesting area, really, right? Because I know earlier on, to be fair, I think I tried a lot of things before I settled into where I was. So I remember, thinking about clinical research, I did the GCP, that's a good clinical practice stuff. I think it took me about, was it 6 to 8 hours or thereabouts to get that really, to sort of understand, okay, what are the rules around, recruiting patients, informed consent, when can patients pull out of trials, what are the processes involved and all of that. But somewhere down the line, I was like, this is not really my thing. And, I just moved on from there. But it's a whole, different ball game with lots of opportunities. And I mean, I regularly speak to people who are in this space. And I mean, as long as you're fulfilled and happy, so it also gives you that flexibility that you might not see in core clinical roles. Though some of them involve a lot of travel, some of these clinical research roles might involve a lot of travel and all of that. So again, if you're somebody who's not keen to that, probably you might think twice. But there are lots of roles in clinical research for people to look at. Is it clinical trials coordinator, clinical trials manager? You have those who sort of manage the database of the people who are on the trials, roles for principal investigators and all of that. So there's a whole lot. And research is something that always continue to be done because we're looking for ways to improve what we have now. There's so many unanswered questions in medicine that people are looking for solutions in. So definitely this is an area that is not going away anytime soon for people who are interested, really.
Amazing. A few things usually. So for this role, of course, you would need to some of your history taking skills will come into play.
Yep.
Oftentimes they'll give you a checklist. So it's decent to at least have fundamentals in place, depending on what it is they're doing. So if it's Alzheimer's, it'll be a bit different. If it's multiple sclerosis, it'll be a bit different. If it's bowel cancer, it'll be a bit different. Also, your clinical examination skills would likely come into place. And then your ability to, of course, interpret, the test results that are used in that would also come into place. So what are the challenges? So one of the things is, understanding how you adjust to the NHS system and hierarchy. No, I think this is sorry, that's not necessarily. So this is Dr. Ron's area. So I'm just going to keep quiet and allow Dr. Ron to carry on.
Yeah, so looking at this really, so I think it sort of highlights all the whole areas that people who are really sort of interested in core health tech to get into. So health informatics and digital health project, EHR implementation and optimization. I already talked about clinical safety officer roles, which is a very critical and important role in any health IT project, really. The BAs or business analysts, building products for telehealth. I'll probably just mention like every company who is building something actually requires a healthcare professional to tell them this is what you should be actually building. I remember doing some stuff for a company then, and I'm like, what you're building doesn't make sense because this is not what a typical patient journey would look like in real life. So they had to sort of, rearrange everything they were doing. Then talk about AI and machine learning. Now, all the attention, a lot of money is being pushed into, AI and its use cases in medicine. So for anybody who is looking to pivot, I think it's good to sort of start sharpening your AI and machine learning skills. Again, you don't have to be the one building the models. You don't have to be the one doing all the whole configuration. But at least need a very good understanding of the foundation of the principles, what's generative AI, how do they function? Is it supervised learning? Is it unsupervised learning? You need to grab all of those concepts to be able to function effectively. Then when we look at applications of AI in healthcare is just so massive. I mean, even this graph, it doesn't capture all the areas that we sort of are seeing AI being applied to. You talk about drug development. So now AI is sort of even accelerating, drug development because of high computational capacity and ability. You have people beginning to use or already using AI for medical diagnosis, reading scans, reading chest x-rays and all of that. That's happening. I know a couple of trusts who are even piloting AI in dermatology for diagnosis. I think Skinanalytics or something. I can't remember the trust now. So that's being done to support medical diagnosis. You talk of AI in dosage error reduction. So basically, I think this is a form of a clinical decision support system just to minimize errors. I mean, we're all human, so in as much as mistakes might happen, but that's where the systems comes to sort of support, what we are doing. You talk about cancer research. AI is sort of accelerating cancer research these days. You talk about personalized healthcare. We talk about personal health records and all of that. AI is playing a huge role in all of that. Then you talk about monitoring and wearables. A lot of us are wearing all this, is it Apple Watches, Fitbits, and here and there. So most of these devices are gathering information in the background. So, and people who design these products were thinking, how do we make sense of this data and what can we improve? Think Apple has this feature where it sort of detects where you don't have a heartbeat or something and it triggers emergency response and all of that. That is, all those algorithms working behind. Talk about AI assisted robotic, surgery. That's becoming, common practice. Things around the whole Da Vinci stuff, robots is there. Talk about cybersecurity, virtual nursing, like you have virtual wards, which are a common thing in the NHS, really, fraud detection. So it's a whole lot of areas. And the thing is, it could look very overwhelming, like there's a lot happening. But most times I just tell people, don't sweat it too much. Just sit down and, gain as much information as you can. Then you begin to sort of niche down to say, okay, this is the area where I sort of want to work in and just focus, because you really can't do everything, really. Like for myself now, I sort of am more in tune around implementations, really, and optimization. So those are where sort of interests me, really. So pick as much information as you can. So I think it's also like forums like this is a good opportunity to sort of hear from people who have sort of gone behind you. So again, it shortens that call for you to make that decision to say, okay, this is where I want, because some of us we've like gone around and seen a lot to say, okay, this is what you need to do here, there, and all of that. So, but in all of this, so technology is playing or is beginning to play a very important role in healthcare delivery. So you can't, subtract technology from healthcare anymore. So that's why I tell a lot of clinicians, even though you're still involved in core clinical care, it's good to have a sense of how tech is, impacting what you do on a day-to-day basis. I think it actually makes it easier, really, in terms of adoption and all of that. Every time we're hearing digital transformation is basically introducing, healthcare, health tech into, healthcare and trying to improve delivery of healthcare, patient safety with all of that in consideration. So there's a lot happening. I mean, even health informatics and digital health, that's like a whole day's conversation, really, but is that for health informatics, we're looking at how do we sort of, is more provider facing, like the hospitals, how do we use technology in the hospitals? While the digital side of things seem to be more patient facing, like the apps patients are using and all of that. So imagine NHS app now, for example. when you go into the details of how that app was built, there's a whole lot of people involved in that process. And you'll be surprised that a lot of them are clinicians. I think, is it Dr. Vin Diwakar, the head of transformation NHSE? He's a pediatrician, right? So, and is heavily involved in all of this digital transformation stuff. So that tells you, gives you a sense of what's possible. And to be fair, he will not be doing the coding or writing the programs that power all of those things, but he's heavily involved in some of those or most of those activities, really. So, yeah, I'll just pause for now.
Amazing. So if you for those that are thinking of coming to the country to do a master's degree, please do a master's degree in AI for healthcare, probably as your first priority,
It,
because
it,
that's probably
interestingly,
where everything is going.
talking about that masters, because I did a masters in health informatics. Then I was thinking, I think a lot of people were moving towards the MPH, trajectory.
Yeah,
I'm not saying MPH is a bad thing, really, but again, it's understanding like what's in demand,
yeah.
where the trends are going,
And
and
just the competition ratio as well. If you look
yeah,
at the MPH sector, the MPH is it has a lot of people, while
it's
there's role.
saturated. That's what I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. So you have maybe for one role you have around 50 MPHs.
Hmm.
It's going to happen to AI in healthcare. It just depends on how early you go in.
Yeah.
Now, for one AI role, you can definitely see that maybe one or two persons, and you can see it even in the government policy. They are
Hmm.
prioritizing AI engineers. So if you are AI engineer in healthcare, which being a doctor gives you a really good position to be in, there's just so much you can apply it into. So just think about that as you make your moves. So pharma consulting, I think we've talked about these. These are some of the
Yep.
biggest farmers out there. Deloitte, Kasla, PwC. They have huge interest in healthcare, from health insurance, the growth, the competitiveness. I've spoken about these. You have medical affairs people in pharma, and so they look at, for instance, drugs. They tend to be doctors, but there's a qualification in pharma that you need. I can't remember it now, but again, understanding the regulatory affairs and drug safety, Ron has talked about it, but you need something called, basically the two people that control drug development is FDA in the US and ICH globally. So in the EU, you have the European Medical Agency. In the UK, you have MHRA. I think that's Medical and Health Drug Regulatory Agency or something like that.
Yep.
Part of that is, of course, clinical research associates. You have healthcare consulting and strategy advisory. Some of this rule, of course, is after years of expertise, you may be able to plug into them. But again, these are areas. Business analyst, I believe Ron has significantly touched on that, what the role looks like. And I can't remind you enough of the critical mass of knowledge and skill sets that you need to obtain to easily pivot into this thing. Yeah. So regulatory frameworks work here. Medical advisor, of course, in medical legal firms. This is open to clinicians as you gain more and more, expertise. So usually they tend to be specialty based, and also, of course, with your years of experience. So if something happens in gynae or pediatrics or internal medicine or surgery, you may be able to advise on what you think. Forensic medicine, yes, working with I know doctors that work with police,
Yeah.
work with the RAF, work with different agencies, either on a part-time or full-time basis. I, for instance, just full disclaimer, I am on the British board boxing board of control as a medical officer. So I get to go and, for instance, be physician, ringside physician for their fights, which of course it has divided opinion. I don't do that regularly, but again, it's one of the areas. There's not a lot of. It doesn't pay more than locum, just in case. So it doesn't pay more than locum. So it's not like a lot, but it does give you the opportunity to see people from just how people think about things. You see how the promoters approach things. You see the fighters. You see where they've come from. Just how they are trying to grow their career, and you gain also some boxing fighting IQ. I know some doctors that have trained to become judges. I know not some who can train to become referee or things like that. But oftentimes, at least I know a few doctors that have trained to become judges. And then some, again, of our colleagues have pivoted to sports medicine. There's a sport medicine fellowship, FIFA, and then you are the physician for like a club, rugby, any of those things. So being expert witness, we've talked about this. There are also roles with the GMC, NICE, CQC, and the Defense Medical Services. That's again an option. So there's a lot of more and more options that people would find, and you can see just some of the areas that medicine would interact with, for instance, the law or regulatory body. Dr. Ron, anything to add?
No, not really. I think you sort of covered it all, really. So, yeah, this is another interesting area to be in, really. So, I knew then I think early days, I was still considering, forensic pathology.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in that space, toxicology and things.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the welfare, entrepreneurship, yes, you can start a tech company or consultancy, but like I said, you need a minimal skill set. So sometimes it may be prudent to be part of a company or a consultancy to just see, what is this about? What's my skill set? There's also room, of course, for private medical education services. Again, you need a critical mass of knowledge. You need a critical experience. Again, just warning, the medical education space is not very big. And that's probably one of the most attractive areas,
Yeah.
for doctors. I tend to think you would succeed if you do it as a conglomerate, because what you find is you have everyone, especially in our own community, you have too many pockets. And you quickly come to this conclusion is the total doctors in the GMC register, is it 2 million or something like that? Or less than 1 million? Now, how many of those are taking the exam? So if you take PLAB, for instance, in the height of PLAB, I think you have around 12,000 people taking it each year. So if you are a medical education company focusing on PLAB, you are obviously not going to have all those 12,000 candidates. So, and if you look at, for instance, the medical education space for PLAB, there's just so many people, Plabable, Khalid, Samson,
Exactly.
and then you go to MRCP. So it's not as huge. Yeah, it's not very huge. So, but when you move down to aesthetic medicine and wellness clinics, this is huge because you can have as much as 20 million people in the UK interested in, aesthetic medicine. So there are doctors that have pivoted into clinics where they do aesthetic, from lips to Botox to laser to all of these things. It's an area that you don't need to be a consultant. Some people are not aware to do. And I think for some of it, you don't even need to be a doctor. I'm not an expert in it, but I think roughly for most of it, you don't need to be a doctor to do. Of course, you need to factor the cost of setting up or whatever, or you may want to spend some time, just interacting or being in a clinic of someone that does have a setup, and then you can decide, is there a market here? You get me? One of the areas I think again that has not been explored is primary care. There's room for conglomerates, especially the GPs here can consider having a set number of group GP practice that they can put together and run together, raise money via hedge fund. But of course, you need to deliver service in a way that it's now a really profitable group of 4 or 5 practices, anywhere in England. Of course, if you say you have a set number of GPs that come to do that, that can really be good for, them as a business. But of course, you need to, when you're doing stuff like that, be able to manage the group and manage teamwork and, do things in transparent and proper way. Occupational health is beginning to have a lot of interest now. Is also a specialty in its own right. People pivoting to it.
Yeah.
It in most cases be a 9 to 5. So that most people can find that really rewarding. So wherever you work, sometimes university, sometimes the NHS, tends to be 9 to 5. Then you have the medical tourism coordination. The UK does have its own fair degree of medical tourism. It's not something that is promoted too much just because of the cost. So some people coordinate. It's not an area that I necessarily encourage, just because you may not be able to control the outcome. But of course, if somebody were saying, if someone is coming for treatment and they ask for my opinion, fine, I can have an idea and recommend someone in the UK that I think I've looked at his review and I can speak to them ahead of hand, especially at least if it's in the area of surgery or something. In other countries, sometimes I'm not too sure, and people have had poor outcomes.
Outcomes
have become poor because some of the patients we've treated in the NHS that have had, for instance, bariatric surgery in Turkey, sometimes I'm beginning a bit concerned. Why would you do, for instance, sleeve gastrectomy? You get me? And you discharge your patients within 24 hours. Are you not aware that if your staple line was to be loose, the patient will bleed intraperitoneal?
Exactly.
So I'm not, are you not aware that gastroparesis may last up to 72 hours? So
persist,
I'm not understanding, and then are you not aware that if you move the patient directly to the hotel, the reality is there's no SPR to look after her, there's no nurses, but I don't like being directly or indirectly involved in, things that look like, because if you are knowledgeable to do a sleeve gastrectomy and tummy tuck, you are aware of the complications. So, and that this can happen. You get so, and all of the issues that may come from general anesthetic, bleeding. So it only makes sense that ideally, even if the patient is there, you won't ask them to fly almost immediately. Some of them are flying back with their drains. Are you not aware that if you leave a drain in, the minimum time you would want to wait for is at least 48 hours? Because that's when at least the clotting and so for some areas it's a bit concerning when you see how they approach things. I don't know whether that's in the agreement with the patients themselves. Some of them have come with very terrible
outcomes and
know,
complications.
I mean, I've managed them, so it's not like I'm saying things that I read on the BBC, and I'm asking myself what's happening, because they can have gastroparesis for 72 hours and keep vomiting and develop all kinds of electrolyte derangement in this world because they've vomited all the potassium and come back with alkalosis and things like that, gastric outlet obstruction. So it's a controversial area, medical tourism, to say the least. But if you are going into it, consider all of these. In places that are well organized, yes, and or you understand, I would say if you must be involved in it, make sure you understand. If it's especially because most of it tends to be surgery or interventional, make sure that you can speak to the clinician yourself, the hospital, you understand their processes or agree processes with them. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable if a patient is going for sleeve gastrectomy. Even if you are discharging them, understand that you shouldn't allow them go to a different country. You get me? So stay 72 hours, you can eat, food is going down, there's no issues, fine. If there's an issue, you can come to the A&E and let them call me. At least that's how they would do it in the UK. So except you can agree on those, I think you may just run the risk of, because you are a doctor, indirectly putting yourself in the line of fire. Because if the patient was to raise a complaint, you referred them anyway. You get me? So you have some liability. So, but there's a lot of, it's a big industry, 4.4 trillion. And then some people do the low risk one, wellness clinics, exercise, yoga, breathing, singing therapy, group therapy. Some people train in therapy, which you are poised. There's also a training for to be a therapist, and therapists do very well, and I think the market will only grow. Some people have, made an app. If it's a skill you have, you can really listen to people for a long time. And so you train. It's also, again, amazing work because you can do it online. Person, you can run a small office. You can do it in your garden, do your sessions there. Okay. So what are some of the key skills? We've said some of these already as we're rounding up. So communications and writing. We've talked about leadership. Ron had talked significantly about project management. You have PRIST2, agile, lean management. Digital literacy. You need to understand data interpretation. What's this thing that shows interpretation of live data?
Dashboards, Power BI.
Dashboard, Power BI. All these things are skills that takes time to pick. So what are transferable skills? Transferable skills just simply means skills that oftentimes, those are skills that you can move with. So one of it is general skills, IT and tech skills, communication skills, interpersonal skills, management skills, admin skills. These skills, regardless of rules, you can move with them. What are the career transition cycle? You can see that one is recognizing that there's a need to start transitioning. So maybe that's why you attended this, seminar. Understanding yourself is very key. You need to know thyself, and know what thee wants. So if you understand yourself, you can understand what, where you are likely to thrive. Of course, you have to balance what you want and what is realistically possible, especially in the early stages. You want to take control, meaning you need to take actions. You can listen to me and Ron all day long. It won't interpret. So you want to see what actions do I need to take. If you need a mentor, get a mentor. However, you need to start acting on the things that has been discussed. Yeah, so what you need GCP training, start doing it. You need Prince 2, start doing it. You need PMP training, start doing it. You need, so flesh out what you need, get it right, and learning lessons. Of course, try and get your network arranged, you know, so LinkedIn and all of that. There's this talk about personal branding. I think some people don't understand that you need to have something to give before you talk
Yep.
about personal branding. You can, confidence without content is garbage. And I see a lot of people, you know, if you look at Steve Bartlett, before he started Dairy of a CEO, he was already a millionaire. Yeah. So he could email another CEO and the door will be open. Now, why theoretically you can? So you need a certain level of critical mass. You get me? Before you can start, you know, creating. So it's useful to build that level of critical mass of usefulness to others. And once you start that, of course, branding has its role, but what you should know that people are coming to you with pain points, something that is bothering them, something they need a solution for. And then, of course, when you begin to provide that solution, they begin to appreciate, you know, what you have. I'll give mic to Dr. Ron as we round up, just
Yeah.
to add some context here.
Yeah, amazing stuff with all of this, key skills and, transition. So most times, like for myself, I think from my experience, where a lot of clinicians sort of struggle is being able to recognize the skills they have that can be, transferred to other areas. And I think I usually classify them into 10 very broad areas, really, which is you have clinical knowledge and expertise. That's a domain on its own. You have research and analytical thinking. That's another domain. You have communication and education, another domain, project management and leadership, technology development and adaptation, interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence, regulatory and compliance expertise, skill sets around public health and population management. Then you talk about problem solving and critical thinking. Then you talk about operational and quality improvement. So those are the 10 broad categories of skill sets I usually sort of put things in. So let's look at clinical knowledge and expertise, for example. So as a clinician, as a healthcare professional, you understand pathophysiology of diseases, right? So having this knowledge again can, for example, help you to design or advise people who are sort of building diagnostic products or tools in health technology. We have a very good understanding of pharmacology, how drugs works and all of that. You could lend that expertise to people who are looking to optimize decision support systems for medication errors and all of that sort of things, because earlier on we talked about reducing medication errors and all of that. So you get a good understanding of pharmacology, you can easily apply that skill set in people who are building that sort of product. We have good skills in anatomy and physiology. I mean, that's what we spent a lot of years trying to read, understand, do the whole dissection and all of that. So for people who are building imaging software, surgical devices, or simulation training simulation platforms, that expertise comes in very, very, very important. Therefore, those who are building all of your robots and all of that, a surgeon who has very good surgical techniques could help them refine the processes in building those systems. So this is just one domain. That is basically clinical skills and expertise. Then let's look briefly at research and analytical thinking. Now, as a clinician, as a healthcare professional, we work with evidence-based practice. So I could help people who are designing systems or softwares build algorithms that rely solely on clinical evidence to provide decision support. We look at research, design, and hypothesis testing. That's a skill set. I could easily apply that to people who are building products in terms of validating their studies, or helping them design their protocol. We have a good knowledge of epidemiology, so I could help people support predictive modeling systems which they are building and all of that. So that's like research and analytical thinking. You talk about communication and education. Now, patient education is at the core of what we do every day. We are usually simplifying concepts for patients, trying to explain their diagnosis to them, what the outcomes is going to look like in terms that are not very technical or medical, visual medical jargon. So using this skill now, I can help people who are designing patient engagement platforms, or people who are building UI UX products, because I understand patient education. Then you talk about advocacy for patients, right? Which is something we do all the time. So I could help people who are building tech solutions to make sure their products align with patient needs and experiences. I could help people curate teaching materials, So that's skill sets around communication and education. Now you talk about project management and leadership. Whether we like it or not, all of us are project managers. It's just that a lot of us haven't sort of realized that really. So again, looking at healthcare processes, right? As a clinician, as a healthcare professional, you're always involved in stakeholder management, whether you realize it or not. So we're constantly talking to nurses, we're constantly talking to pharmacists, we're constantly talking to, every member of the healthcare team, essentially. And this is basically stakeholder management and engagement. That's all we are doing all the time. And if you're looking to get into PM roles, that is something you're going to be doing all the time. As a healthcare professional, you're good at delegating duties. For example, as a consultant, you see a patient, you review the patient, you come up with a management plan, right? So basically, that management plan might involve, let's say, 2-hourly monitoring of the patient in the ICU, or suctioning PRN, or giving this medication, or giving this IV fluid, or asking for maybe plastic review or vascular review. This is me, delegating tasks to different members of the team. And that's basically part of what we do in project management. So again, that's a skill set that comes in handy. I'll probably talk on just one more one. So let's look at things around regulatory and compliance expertise. So a lot of us in the healthcare space, we are used to working with guidelines. We are used to working, we have the nice guidelines that sort of, monitors or tells us what to do in certain scenarios and all of that. Some trusts have their own internal guidelines and all of that. So those are things we stick to all the time. So if you're moving this over to another area, for example, policy interpretation, right? I can ensure or help companies ensure they are sticking to, GDPR rules and regulations while they are building their product. That's the skill set I've taken over to that side. Then you talk about navigating ethical dilemmas. This is something as clinicians we deal with like every single day, because we are faced with different ethical scenarios and we sort of have to find a way to navigate that. So a good use case of that skill set is, like this AI thing now we're talking about, everybody's talking about AI. But a big area of the AI is the ethics around AI. How are we using the data? Is it fair? Is it ethical? And all of that is a skill set that clinicians or healthcare professionals can easily move over to this side. So I think the key takeaway is understanding what those skills are, and the scenarios or the roles that you can easily sort of, apply, them. Then looking at the career transition cycle, I mean, this explains it all. The only part I probably want to chip in, so I usually say you do a SWOT analysis, right? And SWOT analysis is basically understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And within that is understanding the why you're transitioning. So I think for me, that's like the most important part, understanding your why. Because you see people who are trying to pivot because maybe it's the trend, because everybody is moving into health tech. To be fair, it's not everybody that can transition. I had somebody that who reached out to me to say, he wants to do project management and all of that, which is fine. So I think I signposted him to some boot camps to attend and all of that. Then I checked him on the other time, was like, this is not him. He's going back to clinical practice. And I'm like, that is fine. So basically, he didn't understand, the why he was really trying to make that move, really, because you will be frustrated. It's another learning curve entirely. Like you said, you have to acquire that critical mass of knowledge. So it's like going to school all over again, learning new stuff, learning new language, and all of that. So if you don't get your why right, then that journey is really going to be very difficult. So I'll just stop for now.
Okay, so let's. Anyway, I think you've talked about your journey. So I'll just talk about here. I think you've addressed this. So do go check out the Dr. Ron's podcast. It's on Spotify, it's on YouTube. It's
Yep.
free. For a little thank you, at least, for all of the work and all of the free knowledge. Again, I've been on the podcast. It's amazing, amazing guests through and through, amazing content and amazing flow. So, what are some of the challenges? You need to identify shifts and clinical detachment, understand visa restriction. For some of the roles, yes, there's a role of visa restriction. Then some of the issues is lack of clear pathways and support. We've been able to at least create this content to help you with that. Key translation into non-clinical CVs, imposter syndrome, and self-doubt. Part of the reason, one of the things with imposter syndrome is, one, the more knowledgeable, as you acquire more of your critical knowledge and skill set, it helps. We're more than happy to offer you mentorship, but it's paid, to give you enough transition time so that myself and Dr. Ron would mentor you on a monthly basis for a fee over at least your first maybe 3 months, so that you understand, the things you should be doing, guide you through getting the CV. Now, there's an error that I see people do. They think, so a CV without skills, actual skills in it, is just a piece of paper. So while you can, of course, write it to make it readable, maybe I'm a bit too direct. Maybe it's the surgeon in me that is speaking. But while you can write it, structure it for a particular field area, because the things people are looking for is slightly different. So if you are going, of course, into project management, people want to know what project you had, what was
Absolutely.
it, what was the outcome. So you need to be writing paragraphs. Now, if there's no actual skills, you've not done any project, restructuring your CV is useful, but it will point out what you need to be doing in the next few months. What skill to get, what is the right place, who you can have ask questions. So yes, we can do that for you, but it's a paid mentorship. And usually after your first 1-2 months, you begin to understand how to get the critical mass and skill set and the amount of time it just generally takes. So we've talked about.
I'll probably just chip in a bit about imposter syndrome, right? I think that's a big challenge that, it's good we're sort of highlighting all of this, because you pass through that process, really. So, but it doesn't mean that you're not good enough, right? Or you don't know what you're doing really. So it's a new space. You're trying to, understand your left from your right and all of that. So, like Doc said, it all still sort of relies on you picking the knowledge you need to pick, doing the work required to get to where you are, because you don't just transition and sit down. Like I said, it's like going to school all over. So you have to look for resources, you have to look for videos, you have to do stuff to actually build that capacity to sort of deal with this imposter syndrome and self-doubt. Is it going to be there? Absolutely not. But can you surmount it? Yes, you can. So I just thought I should mention that.
Amazing, Ron. So yes, so the more your skill set, the more you achieve, the lesser the imposter syndrome. Because then you're saying, okay, fine, I was able to do this. The confidence increases. The more you become knowledgeable, the more that improves. The more you engage, the more people give you honest feedback, you know what to correct, and things keep improving. So what are some of the things? Start small, freelance, volunteer, see whether it's for you. Get some short courses, diploma, mentorship we've mentioned, and see these are all. So the area is bigger than the clinical area. Yeah, there's way more opportunities in the non-clinical area than the clinical area. The difference is this: the doctors that have the skill set to be in non-clinical areas is very small, while every doctor has the skill set to be in the clinical area. Why? Because you are designed for clinical area.
Yeah.
However, you adapt your skill to a non-clinical or alternative area. So that's the difference. So like I said, we are here. We have myself and Ron, happy to mentor you for a monthly fee, usually after the first few months. But of course, if you come to the mentorship, you have to do what we're telling you. Because what I find when some people come to me, and I've been doing this at a high level for a long time, and they're trying to give me advice on how to be maybe a doctor in the NHS, or how to look for a job in. Man, I work for the best universities in this country, not even here, in Italy and Canada. You get me? You must be ready to evolve. You get, if you stay in your status quo, in fact, if you are looking for something new and doesn't make you uncomfortable, it's very likely that you are not doing anything, because know that whatever is good anywhere in the world, everybody wants it. Name anything, if whether it's is a beautiful holiday spot, is a beautiful eating spot, is a handsome man or handsome woman, everybody's going after it, and the competition increases. Is it a beautiful car? Everybody wants it. Is it a beautiful phone? So it's the same thing with a beautiful career. It's a really interesting career. So you are likely going to be uncomfortable.
Very
You must
uncomfortable.
get the critical skill set mass, because the reality, as your skill set becomes more, the number of people competing with you for a role that fits you becomes fewer.
Yep.
In fact, when you get your skill set gets better, people begin to ask you, would you like to attend? Would you like us? We want to talk about, your skill set. Come and have an informal chat with us. So it's important and you require time, because there's an incubation period for everything. So there's an incubation period to be a consultant in medicine, a consultant in surgery, to be an expert that people can consult in health informatics, in AI. There's an incubation period. And that incubation period is like an iceberg. Yeah, you seem like nothing is happening. You get me? And so if you know this, you need to start you need to be aware, what do I need? And you begin to add them, and then the field begins to make sense. Otherwise, everything looks gray. You look like you're cut out of. So take action, get in there and start doing, and take feedback. You get coming with a concreted idea, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. You get because when you experience, you realize it's a different ball game entirely. Okay, guys, this is the section for questions. So please do ask so that we can be able to give you answers that would help you in your careers. I hope you really enjoyed the session as much as I've done. And please say thanks to Dr. Ron, who has given an exhaustive, detailed clarification into the field. I wouldn't be able to do this without him. So please do say thank you to Dr. Ron in the chat section if you're listening to this. I know we have a lot of people that have watched, and thank you for spending the last 2 hours listening to us. Do ask your questions, and please say thank you to Dr. Ron. Dr. Ron, thank you from me.
Thanks so much for having me. While we sort of wait for questions from people who are watching, I think another point that I probably want to reiterate is the importance of having a portfolio. No matter how small, you need to have a portfolio, because these days people are sort of looking out for what you can do, basically, rather than maybe certifications and all of that. Let's say you're going into medical writing, like you mentioned, start a blog somewhere and start putting things down so that there's a portfolio to show. If you're trying to get into data analysis and all of that, you need to show me evidence. Okay, you've been working with even a very tiny subset of data, building dashboard to say, these are my insights and all of that. So there has to be something behind to say, okay, this. Or if you're thinking of quality improvement, you should be able to tell me, okay, while I was working as a clinician, these are some of the QI projects I've sort of, conceptualized and implemented, and this was the outcome. So that sort of is the evidence we're looking for, because to be fair, most of the roles, those are the questions you'll be getting all the time. What have you done? What have you done? What have you done? Because to be fair, we just need people who are able to, come and hit the ground running. We're not saying you should have everything or should be a master. No, but there are some minimums that, if two people came for an interview now and somebody is able to tell me, oh, I've done like 3 QI projects and the other one hasn't done anything, I'll just pick the guy who has done 3 QI projects, because at least he's shown interest, went the extra mile and trying to bring up something and do it to the end and all of that. So very, very important. Build a portfolio, no matter how small it might look. It makes your life really easy. Because case in point, I remember then in the early part of my journey, really. So it's now in hindsight, I'm seeing the value of all of that. So most of the hospitals I used to work with then in Nigeria, right, everybody was putting some of EMR records. Some people were just implementing, changing from paper and all of that. So I was very actively involved in most of those processes. There was even one, they had to build the solution from ground up. So I was involved just out of curiosity, really understanding what they were doing. Oh, this is the server. Oh, this is the interface. Oh, so I just basically picking all of those knowledge up. I was even sometimes training colleagues on how to use the system. But now all of that adds up as experience, as evidence. Oh, have you trained somebody before? Of course, I've trained somebody before on how to use a system. I understand what training involves, what's the structure, what's the approach, what's the process, because I've done it, before. So I just wanted to reiterate that, really.
Thanks, Dr. Ron. Thanks to our listeners. Yes, I'm going to share this on the group, and it's on WhatsApp. It's going to be on YouTube. You can watch it if you've missed. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and do have a lovely day. And do reach out to me if you want to activate the mentorship, which is a paid subscription, and we can get your career started.